Caribbean Investigative Journalism Network is the region's premier journalism organization devoted to holding governments, corporations, and other institutions accountable. CIJN produces groundbreaking stories of regional significance on climate change, human trafficking, transnational drug networks, government corruption, and more. In this special edition of Untold Stories, we partner with CIJN to bring you a comprehensive documentary on the state of regional investigative journalism, the challenges, the opportunities, and the responsibility to our constituents, albeit our audience. This special episode also investigates the citizenship by investment schemes in the OECS, its economic impact, the lack of transparency, the corruption which engenders the programs, and the warnings from the European Union that the end is imminent. Untold Stories and CIJN present The Prostitution of Patrimony.
The Caribbean, pearls in a string of islands, considered to be paradise. But, like everywhere else, the region has its challenges. As small island developing states, economic viability and a sustainable social infrastructure are constant concerns. Each small country must find a way to sustain itself. And as they say, all that glitters is not gold. Corruption exists all over the world, but it's unusually high in Latin America and the Caribbean. Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index paints the picture for some of the region's countries, but many are not measured. In the 2019 report by Transparency International, Citizens' Views and Experiences on Corruption, 85% of the public surveyed believed that government corruption was a big problem, and 57% believed that their government was doing a bad job at tackling corruption. It's a broad subject with many tentacles. Several civil society entities in the region exist to advocate for policy advancement in the public's best interests.
Within recent times, it's not unusual for Latin America and the Caribbean to have a perception amongst our people that, first of all, governments aren't doing enough to deal with corruption, and secondly, that corruption remains very high. In the Caribbean, the perceptions do vary quite a bit. If you turn to the Corruption Perception Index, which is not measuring the views of the population so much as that of expert opinion, business opinion, academic opinion, you'll find that uniformly, Barbados and the Bahamas rank very high in terms of the global environment as being relatively clean countries in the top, usually the top 20%, whereas Jamaica and the majority are seen as scoring below the pass mark. The public does not get value for money, and the government does not appear to act against such persons. And one reason is that our procurement systems are not only faulty, but too many and too often public bodies are peopled by persons not on the basis of merit, not on the basis of qualification and experience, but on the basis of political contacts, what we call in the literature cronyism, or sometimes even nepotism. So that the failure to award public contract, to spend public money, to get value for money, follow procurement rules, etc., means that our people experience a daily loss of value and come to the conclusion that nothing is being done or the government is not doing enough. So what is required, and this is very interesting, because our people, while they see nothing is being done or inadequate action is being taken, believe that the man in the street can make a big difference. He can make a big difference in reporting wrong and in hopefully facilitating sanctions being applied. How can he do this? By being protected from being victimized when reports are made. And to that extent, we find that the whistleblower legislation, which exists in many Caribbean states and more widely afield, needs to be strengthened in a way that makes people feel assured that it is worth their while to make a report and that they will not be immediately victimized in one form or another arising from telling the truth.
There is a perception, and a very high perception, that corruption exists in the Caribbean. And I think the reason for that is not just a matter of perception. I think it's also a function of the reality. And what makes me say that? A lot of the work that JAMP does focuses on the work of what we call the Supreme Audit Institution, and that's what we call the Auditor General in Jamaica. And the Auditor General is basically the state auditor that checks three things on behalf of the government. They provide financial reports to ensure that the way our money is being spent is correct, and also the way the government is reporting on how that money is spent is correct. They also are ensuring that ministries, departments, and agencies are following the rule of law. Now, every year we get these reports from the government's auditor that tells us that the government is not adhering to their own laws about how we spend public money. The Auditor General is telling us that there are instances where persons are not being held to account for how they are utilizing public funds. So if every year we get these reports, and if every year we don't see accountability for the persons making these decisions, then it continues to feed into the idea that there are public officials that are practicing corruption. And what is that? Abusing state power for personal gain for friends, for gain for family, for gain for associates. So I think it's a function of the media doing a good enough job paying attention to these reports that we get from our state watchdog agencies, indicating to the public that there are things that are wrong. The difficulty that the public is having is that nobody's being held to account. So the public perception is a function of the facts presented by the state watchdog agencies that have been reported by the media, which is really how we understand what is happening. So the perception is there because the reality is there.
The role of the media is significant in addressing corruption issues, but there are constraints.
I think the media is an important pillar in unearthing corruption, but as important in examining those features of our societies that have the potential to facilitate corrupt acts. So it's not only a matter of unearthing and that process of excavating hidden misdoing, but also bringing light to the social conditions which tend to facilitate acts of corruption. So I would say yes, it's a very important feature of the work of media, unearthing corruption, but I think that in the general run of media operations and of the practice of journalism, there ought to be a concerted examination of those conditions, whether they're social, cultural, political, that facilitate and enhance the possibility of corrupt acts taking place. We can't forget that investigative journalism is a function of many moving parts, including media viability, the operations of media enterprises, the general socio-cultural conditions that apply in our countries, the capacity of the journalistic core, and a wide variety of factors. So if you arrive at a conclusion about the frequency of investigative reports and the capacity of journalists to engage in investigative journalism, you need to have a look at those other factors as well. In the Caribbean, we are resource-starved in terms of general media, the media landscape. So you will find naturally that investigative journalism, which is heavily dependent on resources, financial, institutional, and even environmental in terms of the social environment. You need to have all of those features in place before you can even start thinking about expanding the base for the practice of investigative journalism. It's not that no investigative journalism is possible. It's just that the chances of the prospects for expanding the base of people engaged in investigative journalism, those prospects are much lower than elsewhere.
Of course, there are those constraints as well. And I mean, it's also coupled with the fact that when we think about independent journalism, is independent journalism under threat here in the Caribbean?
To answer that question, you need to look at the way our societies function, and in terms of the independence of a wide variety of social institutions. This whole notion of independence and institutions is very much rooted in some historical antecedents that have to do with the fact that in the Caribbean there is not this strong sense of self and of self-reliance in terms of getting to the bottom of things and making the changes on our own, accepting responsibility for our own affairs. Now, independent journalism, the practice of independent journalism and independent media would be heavily reliant on those factors. But there are also the internal factors, because if you have poorly resourced media enterprises that are reliant on commercial and political sources of financial resources, then there will be a tendency to ensure that you preserve the sanctity of those sources. So independent journalism is very much reliant on these factors that are internal and that are external. Now, this is not to say that there is not a strong sense of being independent in the pursuit of the practice of journalism, but there are militating factors that are very, very powerful and very frequently overwhelm the instinct to practice the craft independently.
I think one of the major investigative barriers we face in the Commonwealth Caribbean in relation to investigative journalism is the absence, in fact, of a very important piece of legislation, which is the Access to Information Act. In some countries, it's called the Freedom of Information Act. And what this is a statute, it's a law that gives people the right to request documents and request information that's held by the government. And there have been some really important investigative work that has taken place in the region that has been, in fact, facilitated by access to information legislation. So journalists who are in countries that don't have ATI, as we call it, access to information legislation, are at a significant disadvantage, because just by nature of what it is they do, there's stuff that the government doesn't want you to see. There are meetings they have, for which they don't want you to see the minutes. There are contracts that have been signed, there have memos and letters that have been written that in countries like Jamaica, we have only managed to get because of ATI, access to information legislation. So I think that is one of the single most important things that we need to continue to lobby the governments across the Caribbean to ensure that all Caribbean governments enact access to information laws. Okay, whistleblower legislation. This is one of those things that sounds good, but that I think has very little impact. It's one of the things that NGOs and transparency advocates and pro-government, people who are advocating for more openness and transparency in government push for. But, for instance, Jamaica, we have a law. It's called the Protected Disclosures Act. It's a law that's been in place for over a decade, and I am not aware of it having been used even once. I mean, I'm doing some research, I'm doing some reading, I could be wrong, I stand to be corrected, but I'm not aware of it being used. And what it does is set out a very strict regime that has to be followed if a public sector worker wants to disclose information. The other thing I think is that people hear whistleblower and think that the media is somehow involved. We're actually not involved at all. The Act has a list of the people to whom disclosures can be made, and in a setting that would allow the public sector worker to be protected by law, and the media is not anywhere on that list, In a small society, what we actually rely on, generally speaking, are leaks. Somebody will call you and say, boy, Dion, they want you to know X or Y, or you just see, more common, you just see a brown envelope turn up with your name on it, with no return address with information on it. Or somebody might call and they say, I think you should make an access to information request about X, Y, or Z. Those are the kind of informal ways in which public sector workers who know there are problems going on, who know there's corruption going on, who know there's something that needs to be revealed, gets information to the media. In a small society, I would be very, very, very surprised to see somebody deciding to come out and use the Protected Disclosures Act, because I think something like that is going to be pretty much a career killer. I don't think there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be anxious to promote or to employ somebody who it is known has publicly squealed, I use that word advisedly, on what is happening in their workplace.
It's 1:59 on a Thursday afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. Markets closed on an
Sell, damage, repair, replace.
If my money had the ability to work for me and others, what would it do? For business people, it would provide the means for expansion. For entrepreneurs, the financing to innovate. For startups, it would be the initial seed. Oh, how I'd love it if my money would help families get a new home and see the collective progress of my community. That's why I trust Labrie Credit Union with my money. They use it to transform the lives of my fellow St. Lucians, and at the same time, they pay the highest returns on savings and fixed deposits. Truly, Labrie Credit Union is not a bank. They are indeed better. Talk to them about interest rates on savings and fixed deposits. Labrie Credit Union, transforming lives since 1976. Call them today at telephone 459-6900.
Family matters the most in life's difficult moments. That's why Lazarus Funeral Home should be your first call. Be it in the comfort of your home or in one of our funeral homes, we will guide you through the legal paperwork, arrange for your loved one to be brought into our care, transportation, flowers, music, live stream video services, private cemetery, personalized or custom celebrations of life. Our funeral directors are attentive to the big and little details so you can arrange a funeral fit for your loved one. And on that day of the funeral, we'll be there by your side, guiding and supporting you every step of the way. Call us at telephone 454-6555 or 452-7491. Lazarus, your friend in a time of need.
His smile says, I am the most important shareholder.
His handshake says, he's got my back. After all, he helped me expand my farm. He got me new markets and customers. And he financed my daughter's student loan. But she uses the digital wallet to all member services. My brother credits her for the financial advice that allowed him to expand his transportation business.
And me. I can barely see over the counter, but I hand my passbook over with a smile, knowing my mother's financier and every farmer's best friend will be there to support my growth. Because here, I am not a customer, I am one of the owners.
The National Farmers and General Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited.
In this edition of Caribbean Canvas, we focus on golden passports, how they are structured, why they exist, the concerns and the benefits to small island nations. Some of the Caribbean islands introduced citizen by investment programs as a way to bolster their economies as a source of revenue. What are golden passports? Golden passport programs allow individuals and their families to buy new citizenship through targeted investments or contributions. Funds are used to support in-country initiatives, including economic diversification. St. Kitts and Nevis has the world's oldest CBI program, and it's commonly referred to as the Platinum Standard, established in 1984, and followed by Dominica, 1993, Grenada, 1996, Antigua and Barbuda, 2014, and St. Lucia, 2016. There is no doubt that these countries are attractive to many. The OECD report of 2019, titled Corruption Risks Associated with Citizen and Resident by Investment Schemes, states that individuals may be interested in RBI, CBI schemes for a number of reasons, including greater mobility, thanks to visa-free travel or mobility within the EU, better education and job opportunities for themselves or their families, or the right to live in a country with more stable political or economic conditions. But the risks of such programs are also named: money laundering, tax evasion, corruption. It's clear that governments globally need to mitigate these risks and re-examine their CBI schemes. The concerns have escalated with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Dutch politician and member of the European Parliament, Sophie in 't Veld, articulated the sentiments at a plenary session on March 7, 2022.
When governments are selling passports or visa, what is actually bringing in the cash is not those passports and visa, but it's the little blue and yellow logo on them. These stars of the EU flag, however, are not for sale. They belong to all of us, and governments are essentially selling what is not theirs to sell. Golden passports and golden visa schemes are not about attracting any meaningful, legitimate investment in the real economy of Europe. They are designed for shady business, shady money, and shady characters. Now, already in 2014, colleagues, this House called for a ban on golden passports. Then in 2017, Daphne Caruana Galizia was murdered, among other things, because she exposed the corruption-riddled trade in passports.
This position resulted in several Caribbean countries issuing bans on applicants from Russia and Belarus. In the Caribbean region, where do applicants come from? Not every country reports the nationalities. Perhaps worse than this is the fact that not every country reports how the revenue derived from CBI programs is utilized. We take a closer look at the issues in each Caribbean country.
St. Kitts and Nevis, where the Citizenship by Investment program started in 1984. As the world's first CBI program, it has earned the accolade of being the platinum standard of CBI programs. It has a very thorough due diligence process and is respected for this. It has retained the highest scores for quality of life, safety, and security. There's visa-free and visa-on-arrival access to 160 destinations. The countries with automatic refusal to the CBI program are North Korea, Iran, and Afghanistan. Most recently, a ban has been placed on applications from Russia and Belarus due to the current conflict in that region. The CBI program has the fastest processing time, and you can apply for accelerated processing to get your golden passport in as little as 60 days. Mr. Les Khan of the CBI unit in St. Kitts and Nevis spoke with a CIJN correspondent.
First question, how many applications does the CBI program receive annually? That's not a number that we publish. Unlike some of the other programs, the only time this gets published is through the Prime Minister on his presentations to Parliament. So unless it's published in Parliament, I am not at liberty to disclose anything there. How much money does the program make annually? You have mentioned the 2020 Auditor General's report in 2019. Again, this is the Ministry of Finance in terms of reporting. The CIU, just so that you understand fully, the CBI unit or the CIU unit, which I'm head of, is strictly responsible for processing applications. All right, and that's it, and marketing the program. So from that perspective, I'm limited with what I can give you because everything is managed through the Ministry of Finance or through the Prime Minister's office. Okay? All right. Where do the majority of applications come from? Obviously, I can't give you any volumes, but I can tell you that over the last couple of years, most of our applications have come, let me just say about 60% of our applications are coming from the Middle East. And it's across the various countries there in the Middle East, and mainly and China. China would have been a big set of applications coming into St. Kitts and Nevis. There are few coming out of Europe and even few coming out of Russia, but as you know, we've stopped taking any Russian applications.
What does it cost to get citizenship to the smallest country in the Western Hemisphere? A non-refundable fee of $150,000, which is the minimum investment amount. A contribution to one of the special programs and a due diligence fee of $7,750. 40% of government revenue comes from the CBI program. But where do we get the exact figures from on an island where there's a lack of transparency? The closest the nation has come to learning about CBI revenues and expenditure over the past few years sprung from a dispute between the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who is also the Premier of Nevis, Mark Brantley, and Prime Minister Timothy Harris. On Thursday, March 31st, 2022, Premier Brantley revealed figures said to be earnings from the CBI dating back to 2007. Brantley stated that he was able to obtain those figures by having a research team ferret out the information, which he stands by as verified and authenticated. So, according to Premier Brantley, from 2007 to 2021, the CBI program netted 5.15 billion EC dollars, which is about 1.9 billion US dollars. How does the country benefit? Dwyer Astafan, a lawyer and former St. Kitts and Nevis Minister of National Security and Tourism, expressed his concerns.
Unless this thing is carefully managed and administered, you can have a problem in terms of continuing, going back to enslavement and colonial times, of the marginalization of local people in terms of economic and social growth opportunities. So the open-endedness of the program as it now stands requires attention. There's another point in a number of areas, including the citizenship by investment area, that are depriving the local people of the full and fair benefit of the returns of those projects. Resorts which will never be finished, which will never provide them with jobs, which will never provide farmers and fishers and truckers and other service providers, never give them the chance to earn money out of these projects because the system is not operating properly and, in my respectful opinion, is in breach of the law.
Community and social activist Ira McMahon echoed the need for transparency.
We don't know how many passports are being sold. We don't know where the biggest source market, what is the biggest source market. One of the coalition partners, and no less a person than the Deputy Prime Minister himself, so he's unaware of what the size of the pie is because he doesn't get that kind of information from the Prime Minister. It seems as if it's the Prime Minister only who knows these kinds of details. And obviously, that's one of the reasons that they're having problems now. And the Premier of Nevis, Brantley, said the same thing. But as long as that money is coming in, the impetus for diversification, I think, is not there. And so, I think it will continue to be a big cash cow for the government. And so they're, I think, going to do whatever is needed to protect it. It's just that we don't know what they're doing, and lots of behind-the-scenes things are happening with it that we'd prefer at least to have some input on in terms of policy and that sort of, those kinds of things. For instance, they're planning to build a prison, and a Chinese company is apparently going to build it using CBI funds. So it's no longer, they'll be able to use the money that would directly go to the government to build the prison instead, and then turn it over to us. Now, so basically, that's a new form, a new way of doing things, which I'm not sure is the correct way to go, because basically you're putting in a Chinese middleman in this. They'll be making millions in profit. Why couldn't the money go directly to the government, and then they use that money to build the prison? What I personally don't like about how the CBI is run is that there seem to be quite a number of middlemen in there that make money from it, okay? Lawyers, high-profile people, accountants and so on, okay? So it is really an industry in the true sense of the word. And there isn't much oversight and accountability. I think that's the problem.
It is evident that the CBI programs are significant to the country. One of these is STEP, Skills Training Empowerment Program. About 2,800 people are employed under this program, which involves persons paid by the government to work in private sector entities as apprentices or trainee workers. Yet there are many failed projects and sunken money. A number of projects were approved in 2018, including the Royal Mist Hotel in Seaview Gardens, Seaview Heights Resort and residences in Mattingly Heights, Era Development in Hermitage Estate, CIJN, Belmont Garden in Pinley's Estate in Nevis, Wyndham Hotel in Nevis, and Otley's Plantation Inn. These projects account for a combined total investment in excess of $300 million. With the exception of Belmont Gardens, most of the projects that Dr. Harris listed did not materialize or was stalled for an extended period of time. In March 2022, OCCRP released a story on discrepancies involving the firm which popularized the CBI scheme in St. Kitts and Nevis. Henley and Partners, chaired by the man known as the Passport King, Christian Callan. Leaked documents showed conflicts of interest with the Sugar Industry Diversification Fund and investments in the Kittition Hill project. In 2014, the government ended its relationship with Henley and Partners, and in 2016, the SIDF was disbanded, but the conflict of interest and flow of funds remains somewhat unclear. Canada also ended its visa-free travel agreement with the country in 2014, a main reason being the omission of place of birth and name change status of all passport holders who were citizens of the island. What about red flags and persons of interest? In 2013, Iranian national Alireza Moghadam was at the center of a passport scandal as a diplomatic passport holder. Originally referred to as clean by the then Prime Minister Timothy Harris, Moghadam's web was eventually unraveled. While this involved a diplomatic passport and not a CBI passport, it raised the issue of the rigor of the due diligence process by the country and whether or not it is susceptible to corrupt practices. But Canada had experienced other incidents of CBI passports from St. Kitts and Nevis, and there are other individuals with golden passports who were red flagged. As the grandfather of CBI programs, St. Kitts and Nevis is definitely the benchmark for its efficiency with application and processing of golden passports. Its programs are much needed to maintain the economic welfare of the island. What is lacking is its transparency and accountability to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis and to the rest of the world.
Baby, hear that. Baby, hear me out. No, babe, I'm not cheating on you, babe. Baby, security at the bar doesn't even allow man to cheat. Babe, and the boxers I have on today is a pink one. The one at the bar was white. How that making sense? You see, that wasn't me. No. Babe, what?
The Cell. Damage, repair, replace. So, you got surveillance cameras. Great! That means you got a front row seat to watch your house being robbed, and there's nothing you can do about it. Prevention is better than capturing it happening to you. With Sentinel Security, you get 24-hour monitoring island-wide. We install surveillance cameras, intruder and fire alarms, and our rapid response vehicle is always on patrol to foil any attempts. Sentinel Security, keeping you safe since 1982. Call us today for a free security consultation and quote. Telephone 452-4242.
Life is a series of triumphs and trials. The circle of life has all the usual certainties and, of course, the unpredictable. Just one can affect you and your loved ones. Sadly, many fail to prepare for the unforeseen. Thankfully, we've been here for over 138 years, helping you plan and recover. We offer peace of mind at that critical moment. GTM Insurance, sound, solid, and reliable. Call us today at 458-6300 or log on to gtminsurance.net.
Not all passports are created equal. Some facilitate visa-free travel to more than 190 countries, while others restrict you to less than 30. And herein lies the attraction of the citizenship by investment.
Imagine you are a business person living in a country like Dubai, and you have a passport from probably Syria. With all the embargoes and all the restrictions, then traveling to every country requires having to apply for a visa. And that can be a lengthy process. So having to plan a trip, a business trip, can take you weeks. So for these individuals, the benefit is that, for one, they can move around freely for work, for pleasure, whatever the reason is, but they have that bit of freedom in terms of traveling and mobility.
St. Lucia was the last island in the Caribbean to offer citizenship by investment. In 2015, the act was passed, and the new legislation navigated the pitfalls of its Caribbean neighbors. St. Lucia offered an improved brand of transparency in the early days, publishing the names, nationalities, and revenue collected from the sale of economic citizenship. But with a new Prime Minister 1 year into the program, the promised transparency began to be eroded.
It's a matter of confidentiality. We don't publish the names of new St. Lucians who are naturalized. The fact is, they go through a proper due diligence process. We did publish the numbers of people that were approved in citizenship and their nationalities. But going into the individual names is a matter of private record.
Citizenship of St. Lucia means free movement, infinite stay, and potential for investment and property ownership in most of the other OECS territories. The economic citizenship application is a 7-step process that begins with a detailed investigation of the individual.
The application form essentially tries to determine who this individual is. What is that individual's source of income? Where is that source of income coming from? Providing all supporting documentation to build a level of confidence that whoever is behind this application is really an individual, not a robot. And then that application is channeled through a local service provider who will then review this. That application will then be uploaded on CIP's online portal. And in real time, the necessary review can be undertaken of that application by the compliance officers and subsequent due diligence officers. That process can take anywhere between 3 months and above.
We have to do an initial due diligence, and that is because we have to go through a bank clearance process. So before we onboard the client, we would do World Check or DDIQ, or the easiest one I've always said, which is very good, is the Google checks. You'd be surprised what you can get from Google, from blogs, etc. And we have to do this because before the file even gets to the unit to start the vigorous due diligence process, the bank has to do a layer of due diligence.
St. Lucia's CIP due diligence is contracted to US, British, and Indian specialty companies such as BDO Consulting, Exeger, Global Detective Agency Private Limited, and Refinitiv.
They would do an extensive background checks, both in regard to going around and speaking to colleagues of that individual or persons who may know that individual, going into various registries and online online platforms that would have provided information on that individual. And then they put together a complete picture of that individual, starting from his birth, his parents, his colleagues, his workplace, his work colleagues, and presenting us with a complete analysis of this matter.
The third level of investigation is conducted by the Joint Regional Communications Center, the JGRC, based in Barbados. It comprises US, EU, and Canadian intelligence. The primary reason for denial of citizenship is the provision of false information and the elevated risk to the reputation of the country which the applicant may pose. An appeals process is offered to the aggrieved.
So I took 3 persons who were legally minded, who understood compliance and were not involved in CIP. So the Attorney General and 2 other individuals. All the applications came to me, which were immediately then forwarded to the committee, and the committee made their decision. I didn't interfere. There's not one time that I reversed a decision. And I was much more comfortable with that. And I think that they took their time in reviewing the appeals and had the resources to do so because they understood the industry.
Several real estate projects were approved for investment and the creation of jobs, but many never came to fruition. In fact, there are only 2 projects approved under the CIP, the Alpina St. Lucia Hotel and Alpina Square, better known as the Desert Star Development, which promised an international horse racing track, a marina, and hotels. To date, only the international horse racing track has been constructed. The St. Lucia Canals Resort also had a magnificent groundbreaking, and nothing else. St. Lucia's Citizenship by Investment program raised $62 million between 2018 to 2019, more than double the $28 million earned the year before. To date, the program has granted 871 economic citizenships and earned $59,222,523.22, funds which were supposed to be placed in a separate account. But are they?
Because of the exogenous shocks that are coming fast and furious, 9/11, recession in the mid-2000s, climate change, the pandemic, and now what's taking place with the Ukraine war and the supply chain issues. We as small island developing state countries are going to be always exposed to them. If you have to borrow money every single time you have an exogenous shock, you're going to get into a spiral of debt. So the goal was to create a wealth fund that could act as a source of monies in times of catastrophe. More importantly, raise the wealth profile of our country, and certainly monies that could be used to either buy bonds or invest in critical assets of this country.
But over the 5 years, in a very tangible way, tell us what this money was used for.
Exactly that. I mean, when we first got in, there was the idea of an economic fund. The legislative framework had not been established for it. So the monies initially in the first 2 years were put into a consolidated fund and certainly helped significantly in meeting a budget deficit that the government had been running for almost 15 years. We got the economic fund in place with its own independent board. And by the time we left office, we had $45 million placed in the fund. So for instance, when we had not a hurricane, but a storm in July of 2021, that storm did not reach the threshold which would have activated the insurance program. The roof was blown off of CDC. Farmers now would have not been paid because the wind wasn't hard enough to engage the insurance, but it was certainly hard enough to destroy their crops. And so those monies were immediately activated to fix the roof and also to help the farmers replant their banana farms.
What do you see as the future of this program?
You know, the future of this program, as we now speak, is very uncertain, very extremely uncertain. The EU have always stressed on the fact that it does not believe that we have that level of competence to undertake the necessary due diligence. And they also believe that there is not adequate or sufficient due diligence being undertaken. And therefore they are concerned of those individuals who've been granted citizenship of our individual islands, who then have free access to Europe, can be a level of security concerns for them.
In an effort to produce a comprehensive story on citizenship by investment in St. Lucia, we contacted the current minister responsible, Dr. Ernest Hilaire. He refused to discuss the topic, claiming that because of the current trepidations in Europe regarding the program, all member states have decided to stay silent. We contacted the Director General of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Dr. Didicus Jules. He also refused to be interviewed in his capacity representing the agency, who may have to unify the response of the CBI territories. The clock is ticking fast on their window of financial opportunity to fertilize their wealth portfolio from the sale of their patrimony. Will St. Lucia and the OECS countries jeopardize the free movement of their natural citizens in the pursuit of the CIP dollar? Will the islands negotiate with the European Union as a unified OECS bloc, or will they continue to fight amongst themselves to hand out passports to the highest bidders, while the gates of the Schengen region swing shut? Time, money, and European parliamentarians shall tell.
With its 9 volcanoes and popularity for black sand beaches, this Caribbean pearl was captured on film in Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End as Cannibal Island. Dominica's Citizenship by Investment program began in 1991. In his 2021 to 2022 budget address, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance Roosevelt Skerrit stated that CBI revenue will account for 58% of Dominica's capital budget for the public sector investment program. CIJN made several attempts to interview Minister Skerrit, as well as the head of the CBI program, Mr. Emmanuel Nathan, but up to the time of this report, we were unsuccessful. Lennox Linton, leader of the opposition party, United Workers' Party, spoke with CIJN.
The CBI definitely faces some existentialist threats based on the actions in the EU and even the actions of some in the US Congress, where some moves are surfacing against what is called the Golden Passport, which is solidly involved in second citizenship for people in different parts of the world where their passports don't work as well as ours works. But our passports work well because of the goodness of other countries that allow visa-free access to their countries with our passports, like in the Shenzhen area, for example. The minute the countries responsible for those areas begin to take a second look at our passports because they believe perhaps it is compromising the global security architecture against money laundering and crimes against humanity and so on, and decide to move to shut it down, clearly there's an existentialist threat. Let me make the observation that one of the, well, for me the major concern is the mismanagement of the funds collected from the CBI program, or the lack of accountability for those funds, which belong to the people of Dominica and ought to be placed, not some of it, not half of it, not a quarter of it, all of it must be placed in the consolidated fund. And we do not refer here to monies that have been invested by investors in projects under the government's so-called investment option. That's not what we're talking about. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about those funds. We're talking about funds that come from the contribution that citizens make to the Treasury for their citizenship, whether it is from the Economic Diversification Fund option, whether it is from the so-called housing option, or whether it is under the real estate option that requires the investors to pay a fee if it's 50,000, in addition to the investment, the fee. So we're not interested in the investment amount, we're interested in the fees that those investors who are investing in Dominica under the CBI program pay. I have been saying this in the Parliament over the past year, and the government is not responding to say, no, this is not correct, here are the numbers instead. The government says that all its projects, all its infrastructure projects are being done by Anthony Hayden of Montreal Management, and Anthony Hayden has carte blanche to use the CBI money and to decide who gets contracts and who does not get contracts. We're saying that this is totally and absolutely unacceptable, and the government has to bring this CBI revenue and spending situation to right order, where we have the benefit of public tender for the projects that are funded under these arrangements. Citizenship doesn't belong to any individual, it belongs to the sovereign people of Dominica. And therefore, whatever happens with citizenship, especially in terms of sale of citizenship, or the use of citizenship as an investment, as an inducement to invest in Dominica, all of that should be public information.
While Linton raises issues about transparency, there are others who complement the program and speak of its incredible benefits to the island. One of these is Sam Raphael, a Dominican-based CBI agent.
The CBI program, you know, it's unfortunately the public relations around it hasn't been as good as it should be. It's something that's brought tremendous benefit to the people. There are areas of it that need to be, you know, always, everything can be improved, and how can we get more benefits from it for the people? And these are things, I think, valid conversations that people should have, but you should know about how it works first. And unfortunately, there's a lot of, you know, either there's misinformation or lack of proper information or whatever, and then there's misconceptions of the CBI program. So that's why I'm always happy to try to clarify these things, because I think as citizens of a country, if your country is involved in something, then you have every right to know what it's involved in within reason, and that's why I try to be as transparent and clear as possible. More and more there will be a demand for people who want to choose So you're born a certain nationality. Now that you are mature and you're looking at the world, where do you choose to be from? And right now we're seeing a lot of people, for instance, leaving places like the United States, and I run into guests every day that want to choose to be in a place like Dominica, because for them this is more, they've been in the cold, they don't like certain things about where they come from, and they would be more comfortable here, versus people in Dominica. More than half of our population have made that decision and that they've chosen to live elsewhere. So you're going to see more and more of that. So the idea of the advent of a second citizenship, I think, is something that more people are going to want. And being that we're the nature island of the Caribbean, I think for people who like nature, I would say if this is your thing, Dominica is certainly an interesting place. I feel very optimistic about the future of Dominica. So persons who, especially if you're in nature, of course we don't want this place overrun with all kinds of people in the short term. That it has to be controlled growth. Mm-hmm. But Dominica has lost a lot of population, and I would think that we should all be inviting to people who are coming here not to commit crime, who are coming here not to be a burden on the state, who are coming here who could be assets to help the people. I'm not saying they're here to give people handouts, but even by them buying a villa and doing things to give, a young person who wants to have a landscape business an opportunity, the painter have a business, the farmer and so on.
Dominica has also had its fair share of tainted individuals with diplomatic passports. All of this increases concern about the due diligence process with Dominican passports. Global Financial Integrity made the following statement in its report of October 2021. While the CBI program brings important investment for the island, Dominica collected $444 million over the 3-year period 2017 to 2020. It still presents a vulnerability for the country, as applicants whose background checks return unfavorable information are reportedly not always rejected. Applicants are not automatically disqualified for providing false information, nor is there much transparency about the program, save for its annual earnings and the number of passports issued. The impact of Hurricanes Irma and Maria show the significance of CBI revenue to the small island, and if it needs to continue to support itself in light of such existential threats, then improved transparency and accountability is vital to the program locally and to increase confidence among international governments and agencies that threaten CBI's future.
Yeah, appointment.
The cell. Damage, repair, replace.
You did the best you could for him. You made sure he traveled in style. You provided life's creature comforts and all the toys a boy could dream of. You ensured he didn't have to work hard a day in his life. We know he's not your son. He's your big bank manager's son. Isn't it time you engage with someone who cares about you, your family, and your future? Labrie Cooperative Credit Union. We are not a bank. We are better.
So, you got surveillance cameras. Great! That means you got a front row seat to watch your house being robbed, and there's nothing you can do about it. Prevention is better than capturing it happening to you. With Sentinel Security, you get 24-hour monitoring island-wide. We install surveillance cameras, intruder and fire alarms, And our rapid response vehicle is always on patrol to foil any attempts. Sentinel Security, keeping you safe since 1982. Call us today for a free security consultation and quote. Telephone 452-4242.
Life is a series of triumphs and trials. The circle of life has all the usual certainties and, of course, the unpredictable. Just one can affect you and your loved ones. Sadly, many fail to prepare for the unforeseen. Thankfully, we've been here for over 138 years, helping you plan and recover. We offer peace of mind at that critical moment. GTM Insurance, sound, solid, and reliable. Call us today at 458-6300 or log on to gtminsurance.net.
It's evident that citizenship by investment in the Caribbean is a necessity for the survival of most of these small island developing states. The reporting standards vary from country to country. Perhaps standardization of reporting measures needs to be introduced. What is also evident is that there needs to be greater transparency and accountability to the people who are the natural-born citizens. Better reporting on how the funds are being used, and more long-term planning for the sustainability of these nations. Being a citizen of a paradise island is a privilege. The exchange of this privilege as a doorway to other nations requires great responsibility by those who assigned the privilege. What is at risk is the reputation and global good standing of the countries who offer citizenship by investment.
Has never been